All right, welcome everyone. Thank you to our thank you for joining us for our very first Talent Visionaries Summit on navigating the Great Attraction. We're so excited to have everyone here today. I believe we have over 300 people who've registered from across the world. We've got participants from India, Australia, Singapore, the US, UK, Belarus, and even Argentina. So welcome everyone to our first session here today. So really to set the backdrop, just a quick introduction. My name is Matt Tague. I lead the customer talent advisory team here at GEM. And in thinking about these sessions, we wanted to come up with what's really resonating with talent leaders in particular and the talent community more broadly worldwide today. And so I think it comes as no surprise to anyone that we've all heard about the themes around the Great Resignation, or the Great Migration. There's so many greats happening right now, but we really take a fundamentally different view, and we view it more as the Great Attraction. So as talent leaders, with all of these changes happening, it's never been a better time for us to really kind of leverage our expertise, our knowledge, and have a seat at the table to navigate how we can attract talent at massive scale. So this is something that we have the honor to talk to three amazing panelists today about. So joining us today, we'll have Matt Valentino, VP of Talent Acquisition at DoorDash, Grant, VP of Talent at Coinbase, and Amy, who is located in Australia, who leads talent globally at Canva. So across these folks, I took a look today. We've got over 1,700 open roles today that these teams are collectively hiring for. So they are busy. So thank you for joining us in the midst of all of that. And what I'd love to do is hand it over to each of you for a quick intro and also just tell us one word about how you're feeling right now. So with Amy, let's go ahead and hand it to you. Tell us a little bit about you and your one word about how you're feeling right now.
Thanks, Matt. And hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So I'm Amy Schultz. I lead recruiting at Canva. I currently come to you from my kitchen table in Sydney, Australia. I moved back to Australia last year. I'd been overseas for the past 7 years, living in China, Singapore, and the US. One word, how I'm feeling, maybe cautiously optimistic. I know that's two, but like I'm going to hyphenate it and make it one.
Excellent. I love that. Thank you, Amy, and welcome. And thank you again for joining us so early from Australia. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you to coffee.
Excellent. And with that, let's go ahead and hand it over to Grant. Welcome, Grant.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me, and welcome to everyone who's here. I am Grant Darcy. I run talent acquisition, learning, and talent management at Coinbase. Been here for around 3.5, 4 years, so it's been a wild ride. Previously, it was at Google, and I'm calling you from Boston today. As a remote first company, had the opportunity to move from San Francisco to be closer to family with our toddler, and it's been a really great move in all ways, except for the 20 inches of snow that we're now dealing with right now. If I had one word to describe this year, I think honestly, the theme for us this year is build. It's building. Last year was about growth, hyper growth, getting a lot of the foundation and footprint in place. And this year, we still have a ton of growth to do, but we now feel like we have the team in place to be able to build everything from new products to better scaling to launching in new countries.
Awesome. Fantastic. Welcome. Thank you, Grant. And last but not least, we have Matt from DoorDash. So please, over to you, Matt.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Matt Valentino. I lead global talent acquisition here for DoorDash. Been here coming up on 2 years, mid-year. I think the word that we use most often for this year is opportunity, both around the business for DoorDash and the expansion and scale, and then also for the people team and recruiting team. So that's our key word for this year, opportunity.
Awesome. Fantastic. And I think that's actually a perfect segue. So what I wanted to share is I think a lot of folks have heard this, but the Chinese character for crisis is made up of the characters for danger and opportunity, right? So it's a bit of a mixture of both there. And it's great to hear kind of how everyone's feeling about, this year going forward. But I'd love to hear, maybe Grant, you started with your focus on building this year. So what do you view concretely? Like, what's your big opportunity that you're most excited about for 2022?
Opportunity for us in 2022 is to really nail scaling internationally. Like we have gone from hiring, I think in Q1 2020, right before COVID pandemic, we hired 80% of our staff in the San Francisco Bay Area and very few outside the US. And come Q4 last year, it was 90% outside San Francisco Bay Area, and our international footprint is just growing. And so whether it's the APAC region, Europe, Latin America, we are starting to build what we think are the future of our company in the teams and the investments that we're putting in those. We're not doing it perfectly now, though. So I think the big opportunity is to try and figure out how do we find and access the talent, because it's a very different way than we might be historically used to operating in North America predominantly.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, it's almost like taking the playbook and rewriting it somewhat to meet the needs of those local organizations and opportunities. We'll talk much more about that throughout the hour. But I'm curious, Amy, what does that look like for you? What's your big bet opportunity for 2022 for your team?
Yeah, I mean, I was just nodding listening to Grant. So, Canva, we're an Australian based company, and yes, historically, a lot of our footprint was here in Australia, but now I think we're well over 50% of our footprint is global, and we started our international expansion toward the end of last year. We just announced just overnight, actually, another acquisition, Flourish, in the UK, and so that's sort of the next market that we're going to start to prioritize. And I hear you, Grant, like it's a little bit trial and error, isn't it? And I think we naturally do try and kind of create a playbook and then just roll it out, but you recognize just how different every country and market is, both from, I think, a talent brand perspective and just the awareness, but also the legislation and also the talent that's available, right? Canva, my team recruit perm, we recruit contractor and freelancer. You mentioned the Chinese character before, Matt. We're currently on the lookout for a font designer in China that can do that old Chinese character script. Turns out there's actually not many of those around. So it's so fascinating, just the niche skills and the availability of talent that you discover the more you start recruiting in new countries and markets.
Awesome. Love that. And Matt, what does that look like for you? What's your big bet for 2022?
So we spent most of last year building capacity here. We hired, a team grew from 100 people in January to we're about 350 now, just over 350 just in recruiting. So we get to shift from just chasing the capacity needs of the org to looking at efficiency and quality. So we'll drive those two large objectives this year. We also have an interesting, I'd say problem to solve is in our hourly population. We have kind of asymmetrical growth in hourly workforce here in US, Canada, now expanding into Australia with our own fulfillment centers. And that's entirely different, hiring hourly shift workers, I think close to 5,000 in the first half of this year. So that's a really interesting, different type of problem to solve in that population, which is just moves so differently than your standard corporate population.
Definitely, 100%. Yeah. So the theme I'm hearing is that not only is everyone across this group, your hiring is getting more geographically complex, but also in some cases more complex in terms of the types of roles that you're hiring than we've had, historically for a lot of Bay Area companies or global companies that are hiring for tech talent in particular. But I'm curious, what are some of your learnings from that? So you're hiring different people, more locations, more complexity. What have you learned? What's worked? What's not worked for you over this last year for each of you?
I can go first. And Matt, I just hearing you talk about the growth of DoorDash, I'm certainly seeing a lot more DoorDash ads in Australia. And thanks for getting us through the recent lockdown that we had here in Australia. Much appreciated. I think a learning that I'm finding with international expansion is just how many folks you need to bring on the journey and how many new teams you need to collaborate with within TA, and just so many sort of folks that you need to get across, and that I think is requiring certainly my team to really up the ante on their communication skills, their collaboration skills, and also project management, which is kind of I think a new skill set that folks want to develop in. But I'm finding that that development is needed at a much more accelerated pace right now.
Love it. So developing your own internal team and building that project management muscle so they can treat them more as projects versus recs to be hired per se.
Correct.
Love that.
And building off of that, there's a saying that someone who recently joined my team brought in, which is there's no shortcuts and there's no silver bullets, right? And everyone always wants to just say, hey, here's the playbook we made here. Let's copy paste it over here. Or, hey, what if we just outsource it? Or what if we, use X team who's not used to recruiting to hire all of the people in this space? And we always try it. We have innovated a ton. It never works as well as if we think about how we build a bit from the ground up and go in with a plan that we hope to execute.
For our international expansion this year or last year, we launched in of course, we picked some of the most complex countries, Germany and Japan, to operate in. We had the business us saying, oh, we can't hire in Germany. We don't have GDPR compliance. And they're like, well, we'll just do it anyway. We'll go on our own. And we're like, well, let's figure out a way to make it work. And so, what we pushed for is to localize the recruiting as quick as possible. So get in country on the ground, particularly in those regions where it's way more localized than, say, even the differences between here in Canada, here in Mexico, here even Australia, where there's maybe more parity and more different recruiting cultures there. We wanted to localize that experience as quick as possible, even with using local vendors, trying to hire in country where we could for our own teams. If not, go to places like Ireland and Singapore where you might get a proxy for those locations. So that was a huge benefit for us. The closed borders has killed us, though. Germany's been okay, but Australia, Amy, I have a lot of empathy for how y'all are trying to do it there now, and certainly anyone who's got teams in Japan, it's tough.
It is, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And so I'm curious, how you've navigated that a little. I know you and I have chatted about that offline, Matt, but for those remote teams, what's been your experience hiring recruiters in a country that you can't go to, right? How do you tactically do that?
Oh man, Japan was just a pain. I wish I had a good answer for you, but Japan was just a painful slog through tons of recruiters and just having a pretty wide aperture of, trying to get calibrated into the market as quick as possible about what great recruiting looks like locally and what's in the market, not try to repeat what we have here in San Francisco or in our major hubs in the US. And so that took us a while just for us to adjust and get localized and a lot of conversations. And then we just sourced and screened. I mean, we probably talked to everybody in the market and used vendors. And so we didn't have any special strategy. We mapped the market. We went through competitors. We did all the normal stuff, but it took us just getting on the phone. And then there's risk. We're a new entrant into these markets. So you have to get people who are bilingual. It's just a narrow sliver. I mean, Matt, you've operated there, so
yep.
But Germany was a little easier in that I think there's a higher climate for some risk there and job movement and startup environment. So we were able to do a little bit better in that market and move more quickly, but no silver bullet for sure. And we happen to have one German passport on our team, German passport holder on our team here in the US. And I was like, can you go to Germany next week? And she was like, sure, my Nona's there and my uncles are there. She was on a plane the next week. So we had, in that case, we could deploy a proven superstar who just happened to be bilingual. I didn't even know. I found out on Friday night. We had on a plane on Monday. So just happened to get lucky.
Awesome. I'm sure that was probably one of the best calls you had.
Oh yeah, it was
Excellent. That's fantastic. Yeah. So it's really this theme that you mentioned, Grant, that there is no silver bullet. There's no playbook per se. It's one size fits one. And it sounds like everyone's just kind of trying to figure out and iterate based on, what's working and what's not working quickly to really get to the results there from an international perspective. Love that. I want to shift it back a little bit to North America slightly and just more broadly. We've heard a little bit about, how companies have adapted to these changes over the last 2 years. And I know, Grant, Coinbase has been really vocal since the beginning. So your CEO, I was very interested to see, made a really kind of strong push to remote first. And I think you were one of, if not the first, large companies that I saw do that, take that stance. I'm curious, how has that looked, for you as a talent team? Is, the good, the bad? Would love to hear that experience from you.
Brian wanted us to do it from, week 2 of the pandemic. I think it took us about a month and a half or 2 before we fully committed to remote first, and ended up being, I think, the second big company to announce it. And so still trying to live that one down because it's been so incredible, right? I think we were all a little cautious about the step because it was going to mean so much change. And we didn't know that we'd all still be dialing in from our living rooms almost 2 years in. And so I think what's been beneficial for us to be able to take that stand early is it means that we've been able to make that shift in accessing incredible talent, regardless of where they sit, not just where we think we might have an office footprint today or in the future. There are a lot of folks who weren't able or willing to move to San Francisco or New York or London when those were the only places we were hiring. And we were able to grab that talent now. We're able to access it. We're able to engage them and get them on board. It's allowed a lot more flexibility, right? The work doesn't go away, but you can do it on your own time in a remote first world. As an example, my toddler's daycare shut down a couple weeks ago due to a COVID outbreak. And it's one of those things that I can move around my schedule to handle that, where I take care of him part of the day and then work a little bit later into the evening. And I think also then just acknowledging we're in crypto, right? And the ethos of crypto is decentralized. And so I think that's been the sort of initiating factor of the shift. But when your employees value it, like 94% say they want to stay remote first, when it makes us more intentional about the culture we build, the documentation that we create. I mean, our whole goal is it's all about opportunity. This doesn't mean there aren't going to be opportunities to be in person. We're trying to put single floor offices in all the cities where we have a critical mass of people, where we have a strategy once COVID allows it to encourage more in-person gatherings, offsites, meetings. And so we're trying to still build that intentional connection, but giving people that flexibility so that we don't have to hire only in a set or subset of geographies.
Totally. I love that. It's almost like a hybrid structure that you're building where, now by necessity, it's more remote and distance, but you're still creating that intentional connection over time. Then as things allow, maybe bring folks together selectively so that they can still maintain that bond. So that's excellent. Amy, Matt, how have your experiences been with the like remote versus on-site dynamic, with hiring recently for you? What have you both seen?
Well, we're still in a decision-making phase, I would say, on what we're doing long term. So we're kind of outwardly a hybrid environment, do plan to have hubs, maybe taking a little bit of what Grant just talked about in terms of people have moved, and then we find we have 100 people in Austin, so we set up a WeWork or something along those lines. So we've increased our surface area. We were very centered, like y'all at Coinbase, SF, Mountain View, LA, Seattle, the major hubs for companies like ours. And certainly we had to move so quick. So we're probably in the last 3 years on corporate employees up 10x. And so we just couldn't do that in the Bay. So we had to push for increased surface area pretty hard. And that was a kind of a paradigm shift. Now that we've been working this way for 2 years, I'm curious, like a lot of people, how it will come back. But right now we're in a hybrid environment. We've certainly been able to hire in a lot more locations and open the aperture and pushed Eng into Australia and Canada and Germany, other areas to be able to move quicker. So that's been one of our drivers.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you. Amy, what about you?
Yeah, so at Canva, we have offices in Sydney, where our HQ is, in Beijing, in Wuhan, in Manila, in Austin, and we have acquisitions in Europe, and we've got we work in San Francisco. And a little bit like Grant and Matt said, as we're getting critical mass now in certain locations, particularly here in Australia, where we've hired a ton out of Sydney now, where we're getting WeWork offices. And it's like with everyone, it's definitely opened our availability to hire more talent, because Australia has been, our borders have been closed for a couple of years. And in Australia, we have 2% of the world's talent pool for product designers, but at Canva, we're like the 5th largest employer of that. So it's been super challenging for us to hire tech talent at scale in Australia, but now being able to hire in different locations has definitely helped a lot. Canva went out to our employees last year to say, right now we're not going to ask you to come back into the office, but ideally we'd like you to come in, twice a season. A Canva seasons are quarters. And we have, a season opener, which is kind of like a quarterly kickoff. So ideally, wanting folks to come in once we can do those events safely in person again, and maybe one other time per season.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you. Yeah. And just seeing a lot of agreement in the chat here and comments around flexible work and this move. Like it's a trend. And I think it's here to stay for the most part. So love that. Excellent. Just to piggyback off of that. So Matt, I know you and I have chatted a bit, as talking about these international locations, opening the aperture for talent. You at DoorDash, you've been really forward in kind of leveraging some of the data around like talent intelligence and thinking about where to go. Can you talk about, a little bit about your experience leveraging that kind of strategy to help the business define where you should be or where you should be looking for talent?
Yeah, I guess our few of our most recent examples. One, we've traditionally been a hub model for sales out of Phoenix, and we have a dedicated talent intelligence function, market mapping, research now, so we could just run the standard competitive intelligence to look at the entire labor market, to look at our push was to go to new markets and pilot a new hub. That was the hypothesis, like, let's get out of the Phoenix market, let's go to St. Louis, or let's go somewhere else. But a real resistance from a kind of management infrastructure, how we manage teams, how we're set up, leadership kind of still centralized. But we were able to use the market intelligence, the labor market analysis to then power decisions to think about new markets. So we've used it there. We did it extensively in our, prior to our acquisition of Volt, which changes our international approach. We did extensive labor mapping as it relates to the business making decisions about what countries to launch in next, both on the competitor side, the startup plus mature tech ecosystems, and then specifics into looking at language competency education, universities, specific pools of talent diversity. And we were able to share that. It was a great project led by our end sourcing team, actually, but looked across the broad business. And it helped inform the decisions that our international strategy and operations teams made about launch countries, order of operations. So that's, like, to me, is like the sweet spot when work like that influences how the business is going to move next. That's when, when we see the highest impact. So hopefully that answers the question, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'm curious, Grant, Amy, this is, hearing Matt talk about this shift to talent being at the forefront, right? With some of these decisions where previously it had been kind of an afterthought for many companies for many years. But it's so great to hear companies thinking about where is the talent first and then building the strategy off of that versus having that be afterwards. Was that similar to your experiences, or how are you both seeing it?
Yeah, I was nodding and smiling, Matt, as you were talking about Japan and Germany as countries that the business want to open in, and we were super fortunate so at Canva, I think the areas of the business that are kind of expanding first are marketing and engagement, and then sales and success, and we were able to influence, I think, the roadmap for the countries that we prioritized first, which was great based on talent availability and also ease of hiring. And it was wonderful being in those conversations. And I think what I've certainly noticed over the past year is just the breadth of stakeholders that TA are now, in conversations with has changed, and it's gotten greater, which is awesome. But it's just interesting now that the types of teams that I find myself and my teams are interacting with is different to a year ago, and probably like vastly different to 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I'm nodding as well, because I think there's so much overlap in how we're thinking about it. And it's not that every place we put an employing entity has to be where we're going for an operating entity as well, right? It's not, we don't only want to hire in countries that we want to launch. And in particular, the places where that might break down is there's a hub of great crypto talent in certain countries, but they're not necessarily massive markets otherwise. So we probably look to put the employing entity in there or find ways to access that talent before we end up launching products. That said, the fact that we're even having those conversations where there are folks across the people team and the product team agreeing on where we're going from an operational or legal perspective is helpful. And my background before talent acquisition is business operations and strategy. So it's really nice to get to tap my old colleagues on the shoulder and pull them into these conversations and have them help wrangle all of this together, because it absolutely has to be a talent at the forefront strategy. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful.
100%. Yeah. And just to piggyback off of what everyone's saying, I think, for those who've been in the talent space for a long time, there's been this talk track of, it would be great if we could have a seat at the table. Right. And I heard that for many years, TA seen as a cost center. And it's definitely not that. It's definitely shifted. We've all felt that over these last several years. But I'm curious for each of you, engaging with your stakeholders, whether that's the business or executives that you interface with, how has what you need to show them changed? Whether that's a data perspective, or what are you bringing into those meetings now? What does that look like for you when you're meeting with your leaders?
I feel like they're now pulling their chairs up to our table, which is nice. And I mean, for sure, I think the expectation of the data and insights that we're bringing in to those conversations has shifted. But what is nice is, I think we now have more tools to be able to bring the data in, because for a long time we wanted to do it, right? But it was just not easy to access it. And I find that has shifted, and certainly something we're speaking a ton about at Canva at the moment is yes, as we continue to expand and the external talent that we need to hire, but then also we need to get a better read on the internal talent that we have, and a much more intentional focus on internal mobility and being able to map the skills that we have internally and then the skills that we need externally, and try and get a holistic view of that. And that's, a conversation that I'm having with our CEO right now. And it's interesting, that is sort of top of mind for our CEO and senior leaders right now is the skill mobility, the skill development and growth, but growth for our internal folks as well as growth for the company.
Awesome. Love that. Grant, what are you seeing?
It's a really interesting philosophy shift at our organization, because I think, I won't paint it as totally rosy. I'd say there's still a lot of people who come to me wanting to hire twice the people in half the time, and how can we do that? And we have to, pull our chairs together and say, where can we potentially flex? What are the actual laws of physics that we cannot bend here? But I think where we're seeing is the conversation is less about numbers, and it's trending towards quality. It's trending towards outcomes. It's trending towards how do we onboard to make the people that we found more effective. And I think having all of those potentially disparate pieces connected has made the conversation more substantive as well. And so we get a little bit more of that view of, hey, where are things working? Where are they not? How can we improve them? And it's not always the give me more people faster lever that everyone wants to pull. It's sometimes the how do we repair this? How do we improve this for the next people that we hire so that we don't go down the same potential path?
Mm-hmm. Love that. Excellent. How about you, Matt?
So I would say when I got here, we had probably an overly active and incredibly engaged hiring teams, leadership teams with respect to recruiting. And I think part of it was out of necessity. I remember doing my first QBR with LinkedIn, and they're like, okay, here's your top 10 sourcers from DoorDash. And 3 of the 10 were VPs, in the commercial org. And it was thousands of outreach a quarter. They're like, Kevin Wong, number 1. And I'm like, he's not on my team. He's a VP and he's a large org. And so we had that active engagement. I'm super, at first I was like, whoa, everyone's in my business. And then I was, became super grateful for the engagement. It really starts with our CEO, Tony, his operating principles. The number 1 is being great at recruiting. So for us, there's an incredibly shared accountability in terms of building teams, that the leaders have to be able to build teams, and it's part of their remit. And we have to help them and enable them to do that. And we share that accountability. Whereas other orgs I've been part of, it's deliver for me these things. And so they take accountability and look, we don't get it all done. If we don't, they're doing it. Honestly, there's times where I'm like, did that person come in through the kitchen? How'd they get here? And And we need to peel some of that back. So I don't think I think the stakeholder management, to answer your question specifically, we've gone narrower and deeper with our key stakeholders in that we've built teams. We had people that really broad spans of control, like, 7 of the 10 M team members of folks who report to the CEO under one director. And we had to go narrow and deeper and look for more areas to do single threaded leadership so we could be effective, be more nimble, and support the clients like more closely, be more involved with the business and impact on the business and just filling racks. So
awesome. I love that. Yeah, it's a shift from, historically what had been a more customer client relationship in many cases is really shifting more to a partnership. So that is great to see that. And I'll just say, Matt, everyone talks about hiring manager collaboration, but that's taking it to a whole new level. That's phenomenal. You have 3 VPs as sourcers there. That's incredible. Awesome. We've got one question from the chat that's come in that a lot of folks want to know about. So they're curious about talent brand, right? So especially in a remote environment, everyone here today has, amazing kind of, overall brands that are well known. What are you doing creatively to stand out from a talent brand perspective? Love to hear kind of thoughts from the group about what's working right now beyond just comp.
I'll dive in first to let you all gather your thoughts here. Talent brand for us has historically not been really at the forefront. We've had material content on our careers page. We've had LinkedIn sites. We've thought about how we put the right things on the right pages, but we haven't really done much of anything beyond that. And so starting last year, and we hired an incredible head of talent brand recently, we started thinking about, okay, what are we uniquely, right? We're not going to be come build the future with us kind of taglines, because we've started to think, how do we put things out in the world that will at the same time attract a portion of the population and have a bunch of people who see it potentially opt out, right? And so the things that make us unique are what we want to get out, because we want quality, mission aligned, top of funnel, not just everyone coming to us who sees a billboard that we put up. And so as an example, we launched our tagline is Live Crypto, because we think that's what we're doing as a company. We're starting to lean into things like our compensation philosophy, which is no negotiation and annual equity grants, because we want pay equity for everyone. We want to pay you for the performance that you do in seat, not what you did before. And we don't want to pay people who negotiate better more. And things like recharge weeks, where we're saying, hey, we know this is an intense and demanding work culture. So the people who are excited to do that and then would otherwise not take the time off, we're making you take it off. These are the kind of things that we're putting out there in the world as our employer value prop, our talent branding. So I think our goal really in talent brand this year is we're not trying to be everything to everyone. We're just trying to be the best attractor of talent who's going to succeed at Coinbase.
Love that. That's excellent. Amy, Matt, anything you would add from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would just echo Grant around, yes, an effective talent brand is one that folks opt into as much as they opt out of, and I think that's right. And over the past sort of 6 months, I've been building out a talent attraction team at Canva, and the partnership that we have with our marketing and our comms team, I think has never been stronger. And I think there's now an awareness of, like the consumer brand and our candidate brand, like are one, and that that we're sort of singing from the same hymn book there. For sure, I think it's flexibility, it's connection, and our values at Canva are super important. And we sort of have this, like we say, a simple 2-step plan. We want to be one of the most valuable companies in the world, and we also want to do the most good. So how can we really be helping our communities as well? So a lot of our branding is based kind of locally on building more sort of stickiness within communities. And I think, once folks use Canva, then they want to work here as well. So there's just that, I think, real symbiotic relationship, which is more important than ever. And I think how we continue to leverage our employees as influencers. We've long talked about advocacy programs, but kind of like programs sort of now just seem a little bit like, heavy, but how can we have more sort of lightweight, authentic, organic ways of leveraging our employees to also push our brand out there, particularly with more Gen Z coming through. I think that's the expectation.
Awesome, love it. Matt, how about you?
So I think we've been fortunate to rely so heavily on our consumer brand. Most people being familiar with to drive attraction and interest, and certainly, events in the last couple of years have certainly helped with that. We're just really starting to think about how do we segment that out into employee brands, starting with employee value proposition. What is that? We want to be really transparent about what it is to work here. What's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's not for everybody like most companies. But it's an amazing place for the right folks. And how do we articulate that early on and track those types of accounts? So we'll start there and then kind of focus into our key segments. So we won't try to do a one size fits all, but focus on areas like sales, diversity partnerships, underrepresented talent, women in leadership, non-binary hiring, all those areas. And we'll try to target our brand to get those populations engaged. And I really think about not necessarily the whole life cycle, but how do we attract, engage, recruit, hire? And then we have kind of partnership teams that will onboard, develop, grow, retain, exit. And so we really want to gear that part of the employee value proposition to the front end of that. And we're starting to cater it, but we'll start small. We'll do it. It won't be one size fits all, but start with start with our high need areas where we can draw the biggest impact. We're limited on resources too. We'd go bigger if we could, but it's always an area of constraint.
Totally, yeah. Fewer areas done better makes total sense there. And I'm curious too, just to piggyback off of that. So I think when you look at talent attraction, the metrics often look different, right? It's not a matter of generating hires today necessarily. It's about seeding the field for hires tomorrow. But as you're building these teams and these functions within your teams, how has the data you look at changed? Do you look at different data for your talent attraction teams? And if so, what is that?
That was the first task that I gave our head of talent brand when we hired her, is tell me how we're going to measure whether or not we're successful here. What's the ROI other than hires coming in from these channels? And so in addition, I think hires are important, right? But I think we are looking at other metrics like talent brand awareness, right? I didn't know that this is something that is actually consistently measured, and we can look at it and we can try to drive. And I think that's been an area of focus for us, is what we're doing getting that acknowledgement. And then there's a little bit more tactical, the things that would potentially show engagement, but not necessarily lead up all the way to the hire, which is, views, page clicks, applications, et cetera. The things that show that there is activity being driven by candidates who are interested because of what they have seen or engaged with from our talent brand perspective. So I think there's end state hires, always the ROI we want to drive. Understand it could be 6, 12, 18, 24 months before someone who engages with us decides they're going to join. So we'll look a little bit at the activity further up the funnel, and also just the overall awareness in the ecosystem.
Awesome. Love that. Matt, Amy, would you add anything to Grant's comments there?
No, I think at the moment, awareness, we only did our first paid talent brand campaign about 6 months ago at Canva, which is kind of nuts when you think of sort of the growth that we've had. And at the moment, we're sort of only able to kind of really measure that awareness and those kind of engagement, like clicks and applies and views and folks that then come into the funnel. But we just made a decision to get a CRM and a new CMS. So I'm kind of excited about now having those tools where we can really think about what are those meaningful metrics that we want to measure up front, and then kind of implement to be able to track those over time, which is cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, nothing to add from us. We're surprisingly far behind in this, maybe similar stage to Amy described, in terms of really just launching first targeted ad campaigns in the last year or so. We've done pay-per-click stuff and featured ads on places like LinkedIn, but we haven't had a sophisticated model where we're measuring outcomes yet. But I'm hopeful we'll get there.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's really a mindset shift too. I think that I know I've seen this in this space, that TA leaders have often been more akin to sales leaders, focused on the end of day hires and measuring those very granularly, but missing a lot of that top of funnel marketing piece, that marketing mindset, the metrics, even that way of thinking is different. So it's so great to see, across the three of you, how you're coming along on that journey. And I think that'll be a big theme for talent leaders for the foreseeable future, definitely. Excellent. Just want to shift a little bit here to diversity. So I think this is an area, that has come to the forefront, long overdue. Roughly in 2020, we all have been feeling that and aware of it, the increased, focus on it. Amy, I wanted to ask you in particular. So I know Canva, you have this amazing community of diverse creators. So your product is really set up to cater to that, and it's fantastic what Canva as a company has done there. But how is, with the shift to virtual, how has diversity recruiting changed for you in the last year, and how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, great question. And yes, you're right. I think at Canva, we want to be a celebration of diversity, full stop. And one of our priorities last year and this year continues to be how do we diversify the Canva workforce. But as you mentioned, Matt, like we have this, this community of users globally that use Canva, and when they come to Canva and when they want to, create their Lunar New Year, celebration template or invite to a party, they want that design to look and feel authentic, and in their language, they want to see folks that look like them. So the middle of last year, we kicked off a project that we called internally Truly Local, and that kind of actually ended up sort of being a bit of a blueprint for how we continue to expand globally. But we were hiring template designers all over the world, which was such an interesting project to be in. And any product-based company, right, you need to think about the inclusive experience that both your users have, and that means then that the employees that we hire, need to have a diverse representation. Specifically, you asked me how has diversity recruiting changed over the past year. I mean, for me, like diversity recruiting is recruiting, like sort of full stop. My focus is how do we make our processes more inclusive? How do we make our talent brand more inclusive? Like, how do we help our hiring managers and our interviewers, create more inclusive experiences? And I've just actually onboarded in the past couple of weeks, a couple of, inclusion recruiting partners. One will really focus externally on helping us build, partnerships to help more diverse talent come into our funnel, and then the other working internally with our hiring teams to ensure that our processes are as inclusive as possible.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you for that. And I couldn't agree more. Yeah, diversity recruiting is recruiting. And if not, it should be. So I think that's a phenomenal call out. Excellent. Grant, Matt, would you add anything to Amy's comments?
Sure, I can jump in. I think last year was probably transformational year. One, we published our first external diversity report, which although we have a long way to go, the progress is certainly significant and measurable. So we were pleased with outcomes there. And then we set long-term aspirational goals around representation for DoorDash and put those external too. So now we actually have a kind of North Star to work backwards from. So we'll take those goals and we'll translate them into how we recruit, where we recruit, in our strategies. So I think that's been one of our big shifts. We've also, I think Amy mentioned diversity enablement folks pointed at recruiting. We're fortunate to have that partnership with our DEI team and have folks who are directly focused at all areas from attract and engage to recruit. What's our process look like? Is it fair and equitable? And this year we're actually focused specifically with some OKRs around process and consistency. And I think that's going to drive greater outcomes. But great successes over the last year, but a long way to go.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Grant, anything you would add?
Yeah. Historically, we've thought about diverse recruiting in three ways, right? There's lean in at the top, right? We have a rule where we have to have a diverse panel before we can make a hire at our most senior levels. And that's so that we make sure that we have diversity at those senior levels, role models, people who are mentors for and attractors for diverse talent. Lean in at the bottom, like lean in entry-level hiring where the talent pools are naturally more diverse, because people who are graduating from tech universities or with software engineering degrees are just getting more diverse over time, which is fantastic. And then for all roles, make sure that we have representative top of funnel and unbiased processes. So we do constant checks to make sure that we aren't biasing against certain backgrounds, certain genders in our interview process. And what's interesting is as we globalize, this gets more complex, right? Diversity has to be defined very differently when you're hiring in Asia or Latin America than when you're hiring in North America or Western Europe. And so we're still trying to honestly figure that out as we scale. But I will say the main goal that we have, our North Star is actually belonging more than it is diversity. So we want to make sure that everyone who joins feels like they belong, regardless of their background, their race or ethnicity, their gender. And so we measure this quarterly. Our underrepresented populations actually in our most recent survey scored higher in their belonging and sort of engagement within Coinbase than other populations. And it's been a great testament to the work that we do.
Excellent. That's fantastic and great to hear. Thank you, Grant, for that. We do have an audience question related to this topic. So any secret sauce that any of the panelists have for attracting Gen Z? Not sure if anyone wants to pick that one up, but that came in from our audience there. Yes, from Denise. Thank you, Denise.
I can answer quickly because maybe I'm an outlier, but I could say no. We haven't taken any specific attraction technique for specifically targeted at Gen Z. I don't know that it's our highest volume of where we hire, like if we would put our money there right now, just because we hire so much less at that level than maybe other organizations do. But we certainly think about the employee segments and in the generations and how they respond to work and work environments, but we haven't done any targeting at that level yet.
Awesome.
I think, it's going to be such an interesting generation for us to all harness. When you look at what is important to Gen Z and kind of what their skills and their attributes are, they like the variety, they like the, sort of the project work and kind of those shorter term sprints. So how can companies actually leverage that talent more to mobilize, to work on some of the biggest priorities that might only need kind of a sprint for a couple of weeks or a quarter or something. So I feel like there's such an opportunity for us to think differently around how we once we attract the talent and hire them. But I do think that that's actually part of the attraction, right? So it's the flexibility, it's the connection, and then it's the ability to be able to build skills. And work with folks that they can learn from on kind of like really like challenging work that taps into their creativity. It's like super smart. Like I am constantly blown away whenever I'm on a call with a recent like intern or grad, and just the ideas and the creativity and the passion that they have. I'm like, oh, can I get that in an Avena strip? That would be really cool.
Love it. Yeah, I wish that was available. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
I see some of the comments coming in the chat as well around TikTok. Like, I would love to say that we've done TikTok resumes. We have not gotten there yet. It is something that certainly should be on the roadmap, using social media more as a marketing tool, finding ways for us to engage with as an employer, not just as a brand or a product. And I think that's going to be a next step for us. Right now, I think, dovetailing off of what Amy said, what we are hearing that Gen Z is interested in, or a lot of the folks that we're hiring, is flexibility and mission alignment. And those are things that with remote first, we're offering a lot more flexibility. Mission alignment, again, not for everyone, but if you're excited about increasing economic freedom in the world and the crypto economy as a whole, then Coinbase is a great potential mission fit for you to jump in and support. So nothing, though, specifically tailored through social media channels yet, though.
Grant, if you do TikToks, I'll follow you.
All right, I'll have to download it first and get my wife to teach me how to use it.
Yeah, we'll check in on 2023, how everyone did on this there. That'll be awesome. Excellent. And so just jumping to our last question here. So on this theme of attraction, so I think we've all seen this and acutely felt this, but it's never been a better time to be a recruiter in some ways, and it's never been a worse time to be a recruiter. But that being said, there are I looked this morning, 300,000 open recruiter roles in the US alone as of this morning. So there is a lot of demand out there for recruiters and recruiting talent there. So I'm curious, for each of you, what are you doing to attract recruiters specifically? And how do you attract the attractors, let's say?
Attract the attractors. I like it. I think there's over 500,000 open recruiter roles globally on LinkedIn at the moment. And then, when you jump into Recruiter and do sort of a high level search of like recruiters, just 1.2 million profiles. So, the supply and demand for recruiters is tighter than software engineers right now. And imagine if companies were imagine if this conversation was happening in companies about how do we attract and retain recruiters as much as it's happening around how do we attract and retain software engineers. I think the world will be a different place.
Yep.
How we're thinking about it at Canva is really focusing on that, on the skill development. Most folks that if you're in recruiting that are on the call, you probably fell into recruiting. And that sometimes means that our skill development and our learning and training opportunities are kind of minimized. And I think that's such a miss. So our priorities this year at Canva, like two of our biggest priorities are around team well-being and team development. I think our greatest opportunity is how do we develop our teams. Our greatest challenge is how do we prioritize their well-being. Because us more so than a lot of other segments in a company have kind of really felt the whiplash. So I'm really thinking about both of those, both the well-being and the development, and trying to find some sort of balance. And I think the companies that prioritize those two will continue to attract recruiters, and you need to be able to show the investment. And I think you need to be able to demonstrate to recruiters like that from the CEO down, they value this function and they are investing in it both from a resources perspective and then also from a technology perspective. And I think recruiters are asking those questions as they should.
Yes, exactly. Now more than ever. I couldn't agree more, Amy. That's excellent. Grant, over to you.
We have like product managers at our company that are sad about how frequently our talent team gets shouted out in all hands meetings or executive team meetings. Like it is, I think, great that recognition happens, Amy, and I think totally critical to show that value given how tight the supply and demand are. I agree with one thing that Amy said. You have to have incredible opportunities for learning, for advancement, for professional development. That's just, it's table stakes, right? We are all in companies that are in incredible growth mode, and that rising tide raises all boats. And so what that means is that you join one of our companies, you're going to have the opportunity to take on more faster than you ever will in your career, right? It is going to be the best career accelerant that you can have. And we're hiring great leaders to make sure that they're attracting those right folks and bringing them in from the companies that they worked with previously. I think the other thing that we, not uniquely, but possibly differentially are doing is specializing a bit more. So instead of saying, hey, experienced recruiter, let me make you do everything from reviewing applications to scheduling calls to, all these menial tasks, low-level, low-value tasks. In order to get to those hires at the end, I'm going to take all that stuff that you don't like off your plate, and we'll give it to people who can do it far more efficiently and effectively and who are excited to do it. And what we're going to do is give you the candidate interaction, the client management, the close, the things that really you turned into a recruiter to do. And so that's helped us both minimize our need for experienced recruiters and sourcers. It's still a massive need, but it's helped us minimize that, and it's helped us make those jobs even more meaningful for the folks that we do hire.
Awesome. Thank you. Matt, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I guess my only thing is we were fortunate to get a huge batch of headcount in the second half of last year. So we are pretty staffed up right now as of today, subject to change quickly. I think what we have to sell is the broader DoorDash opportunity. So I always try when I talk to, folks coming to this team, one, it's a double-edged sword. There's an ambiguous path here to your next thing. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know time horizon. It's a growth company. That has to excite you a lot. And you have to feel empowered to take advantage of it, because the folks who do, you see them go on to do great things. But we try to sell that opportunity. And then also a lot of people just know us for food, and the business is much more complex. And I think when you look into the totality of the operations and logistics network, what we're trying to do, kind of longer term vision, we try to get people engaged with that. I try to get that hook in them first. So oh, wow, this is way bigger than I thought. There's way more here than I ever thought. And so I think if we can get that hooked into them, then, mechanics of recruiting, there's parallels in all of our shops and orgs that we've all worked in that, we can talk through. But I think if I can get that hook in them, then they're more inclined to come. And we can also get engagement from our C-suite. Tony will talk to recruiters to help us close. Like we can call in the closer when we need, but hopefully we can do a good job of selling that vision longer term and the opportunity.
Excellent. Yeah, CEO close always helps, especially with recruiters. That's for sure. Excellent. Well, that is our final question. So just want to give a huge shout out. There's a lot of people resonating with everything that all of you mentioned in the chat. Lots of great comments in there. So definitely check that out afterwards. But just a huge thank you to all three of you for taking time out of your day to share with us a bit about your experience, kind of what you're facing and what your plans are going forward. So thank you all for joining us this morning. So just with that, for all the folks on the stream, just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you as well for attending. So this is our inaugural kickoff for our Talent Visionaries series. So if you enjoyed this topic, we're going to have topics like this throughout the year with a variety of talent leaders across different companies and spaces. So we definitely want to hear your feedback on this. We want to hear your questions. So if you're interested in hearing more content like this, we encourage you to go to gem.com/talent visionaries. We'll also put that in the chat as well, but go there, sign up. We're going to have a lot of great articles, thought leadership pieces. We really want to hear from you. So definitely please go and check that out. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone, wherever you are. Thanks, everyone.